Good afternoon, ladies. Oh, good morning, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. On a different time zone. Thank you for coming this morning. We've decided to give you your colleagues a bit more time to come, but I think we've probably half an hour is enough for them to arrive. Maybe if you can close the door, please, because we can keep the air conditioning cool. We like to keep these sessions fairly informal. The way it's formatted is that I'll take you very quickly through a slideshow to essentially to tell you what are some of the key areas in respect to the civil service reforms. And then we have Jane Curran, who's here with us, who will also then talk about some of the specific issues pertaining to the job evaluation exercise. And then we'll open up the floor for any questions that you may have. As we find that a lot of the times when we do present the slides, some of you may have read the Fiji Sun today. A number of issues were raised by a lot of the nurses yesterday in the session we had in Suba at the Khatri Hall. And then also we had a session in Nasuri. So we are here today. This afternoon we go to Nandi at about 2:15 p.m. And then on next week, Monday, we are in Lambasa and Sabsabu. And then on Tuesday, we are in Nandi. And that sort of completes the consultations in respect both with the nurses and other civil servants. As you know, we've already had one round of consultations specifically only for teachers. There's a lot of issues pertaining to teachers which we've clarified. After we finish the question and answer session, I also have a very quick presentation subject to your approval on the budget. So at least you realize where you sit in within the budget as announced in the 2017-18 budget scheme. So if you can start off with the first slide. Everybody talks about retirement age. Retirement age used to be 60 years until 1987 when Rambuka came along and reduced the retirement age from 60 to 55. Many people say the reason why Rambuka reduced the retirement age from 60 to 55 was because he wanted to get rid of a lot of civil servants, some of them perhaps based on their ethnicity. Whatever the reason was, that he reduced the retirement age from 60 to 55. Then came along Garase in 2000. He then put up the retirement age from 55 to 60 because the speculation is he wanted some people to stay in within the system and he didn't want them to go out because of political, tendencies that they had to support him. So that's how the retirement age history came about. So initially it was 60, Rambuka reduced it to 55, and then Garase put it back up to 60. I can tell you why we did it. We reduced the retirement age to 55 was because today 69.4% of the entire Fijian population is below the age of 40. So in other words, those of you over the age of 40, including myself, we are in the minority. The people below the age of 40 are in the majority. So we need to create more employment opportunities for them. However, notwithstanding the fact that retirement age is now 55, where there are scarce skill sets and re-engagement can take place for those over the age of 55, should they have scarce skill sets that they may possess, that government may require. And when they are re-engaged on a yearly basis, subject to there being succession planning. In 2007, we reduced the retirement age to 55. It was actually challenged in the court of law by one of the unions. We went to the High Court, we won. In the Court of Appeal, we won also, where the court actually did hold that we have the ability to reduce the retirement age from 60 to 55. The objectives of the reform is a coordinated program of change. The whole idea of the reform is not just about increasing salaries, increasing allowances, but also to create an environment where there is a lot more transparency within the system, where people are actually appointed on merit, where people who, for example, may be high flyers within the system have the ability to apply for positions. Generally in the civil service, as you know, the trend has always been for a number of years that if, for example, this group of ladies over here, they apply for a position, generally just because if this lady has been there in the system for much longer, the idea is that she'll get the job because she's been there for much longer. But that system does not take into account, for example, the lady sitting next to her, even though she may have less years of experience, she actually may be a much better worker than this lady here, even though she's been in the system for much longer. So the OMRS system actually recognizes people on their merit. So anybody can actually apply for positions. and you'll be judged on your ability to do the job as opposed to how long you've been in the system, as opposed to who do you know. There are so many people who've said to me in the past 10 years since appointment, they said, oh, that person got the job because they eat okay, or that person got the job because they're Indo-Fijian, or that person got the job because those people went to the same school or go to the same church or come from the same province. Whatever it is, we want to get rid of that. The idea is that people need to be appointed purely on merit and the ability to perform the job that is at hand. The other point of the reform is also now, as you know, under the Constitution, your contract is actually with your permanent secretary. As you know, previously, appointments, promotions were actually dealt with by the PSC itself. You're actually now appointed by the permanent secretary, so you're actually employed by the ministry itself, not the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission only employs permanent secretaries now. They only employ permanent secretaries, not you. So your engagement is with the ministry. And that obviously is a continuing relationship that you actually will have with the ministry itself. The idea of the reforms obviously is to attract and retain good people. Is to attract and retain good people. One of the things we found, as Jane will also tell you, when we actually did the comparison of the salaries and looked at how much people are being paid in the private sector compared to how much people are being paid in the civil service, generally we found that at the intake level, government paid a higher salary compared to the private sector. But as years went by, the private sector went up and we actually went down. So this is why you find a lot of people in middle management level or senior level tend to leave the civil service if there are other opportunities available outside the civil service. So in certain areas, we have a lot of people leaving the civil service because at middle management level, and as you get into senior levels, because we weren't paying enough, they were actually leaving because other organizations were paying them better money. And also, one of the reasons that we had, like even within nursing cadre, now you actually have specialized nurses. Previously, the old system did not recognize that. Everybody was treated the same. There are certain nurses who perform a much higher level of risk areas, in a higher level of risk. There are certain nurses actually, for example, who are working with procedures where they do stenting. Now, they obviously perform a particular skill set that's a lot higher, onerous. If they make a mistake, a person can lose their life, as opposed to a nurse who may be, say, dealing in the outpatients, putting bandages on. So they're quite different skill sets. So the reform actually allows for us to be able to make those points of difference. And of course, the idea is for us as a government, the idea is that we need to be able to ensure that we create a civil service that is ultimately answerable to the members of the public. We need to be client-focused. As we've said, the example that I gave yesterday, the Ministry of Health administrative staff, the HR department, needs to ensure that they look after, for example, the nurses. I know some of you here look like nurses. You must be nurses. They need to look after the nurses. Now, because you are their clients, if they look after you, then you'll do your job well. That should be a key performance indicator for them. If you do your job well, then the members of the public will actually be a lot more satisfied. If you don't do your job well, then members of the public won't be satisfied. So as a government, our job is to ensure that members of the public are satisfied. In the same way as we told the Ministry of Education staff, a lot of the teachers, we have something like 10,000 teachers in Fiji today. Now, the headquarters, there's a lot of complaints about headquarters and how they were managing teachers, etc. So we said to the headquarters, your responsibility is to ensure you look after the teachers. If the teachers actually perform well, then the people they are serving are the 220,000 students in Fiji who all now get free education. If the teachers serve them well, we get a better crop of students coming out of our schools. That means our future is secure because these people have learned well. And so it leads to economic growth. This is how we need to view the relationships that we have. Traditionally, the relationships have been reversed. As civil servants, as ministers, we all need to think that we are here to serve the people and they are our clients. And how best do we create that environment to serve the clients? Next, please. The OMRS was actually implemented or introduced in January of 2016. Open merit aims to ensure only the knowledge, experience, skills, and abilities required for the job are considered in the assessment. So, and recent changes, of course, means in respect of the appointment. So, in your OMRS system, if you apply for a job under OMRS, now what we're saying that any bands below J, you have to have a panel of 3 people. Out of the 3 people, at least one person needs to be from outside the ministry to give you that level of independence. Bands J and above, you need to have at least one person from the ministry, one from outside the ministry, and one outside completely from government, because they're senior positions. So you need to be able to get people who have a very independent view regarding service and how we choose people. That creates a level of transparency. Of course, when you apply under the OMRS system, we need to ensure that you feel satisfied with the system. So assuming there's a group of ladies here sitting in the front, they apply for a particular position, the lady in the middle is dissatisfied in the manner in which the OMRS was run for that particular position, she has the right to appeal. Now, when she appeals directly to the Public Service Commission. Why does she appeal to the Public Service Commission? Because the Public Service Commission holds the Permanent Secretary accountable. The Permanent Secretary is the one who's supposed to ensure that the OMRS system is working well. Now, when she applies, or when she appeals the particular position that she's applied for and she's not satisfied with the procedure, she appeals against the outcome, she makes that appeal without having to tell anybody. She does not have to tell her immediate superior. She does not have to tell the Permanent Secretary. It's paper-based. She simply writes to the Public Service Commission. We have now a full-time commissioner, a gentleman by the name of Laurie McGrath. He's an Australian. He's been working in Fiji on a number of things. He's actually quite good. He knows about the public service system in Australia too. You apply directly to him. And then if he says, yes, the system, the procedure was not adhered to, he then simply tells the Permanent Secretary, you have to redo the entire process again. The Permanent Secretary won't know who appealed, and they simply have to redo the process. However, the Public Service Commissioner cannot appoint her to the position. He does not have the authority, because remember, you are appointed by the Permanent Secretary. But he has the ability to say, get rid of that particular outcome, redo it again. So you have the right of appeal under the OMRS system too. Now, the contracts that you sign, or some of you may have signed already, or those of you may not have signed, the contracts are up to 5 years. In particular for nurses and teachers, we've said it's for 5 years, and for nurses and teachers, it is an automatic right of renewal, subject to you meeting all the terms and conditions. Now, the other issue that was raised was, there are a lot of unions and other people saying that just because you have a contract, you won't have the right to get a loan. You can't go to banks and get a loan. It's utter nonsense. Everybody outside of government is on a contract. All the companies here, even municipal councils, some of them have contracts. I used to work in the private sector. I had a 3-year contract with my employer, but I had 2 bank loans. So you can get bank loans. All the banks have come out and said you can get bank loans even though you have a contract. So that's one fallacy. I want to highlight that to you. The other thing is that already before the reforms, 70% of the civil servants were already on contracts in any case. So it was only about the 30% that weren't in the contract sphere. Of course, just because you have a contract, it does not mean your employment can be terminated at any time, because there are specific guidelines regarding termination. Your contract obviously has specific guidelines, but also we've rolled out, and all of this is available on the website. It's for you to see. You can go to the website and see what the guidelines are. So it doesn't mean that just because I say, for example, I'm a permanent secretary, and I wake up in the morning and I don't like this gentleman's haircut and I terminate him. I can't do that. I have to go through a particular procedure. And of course, that's also again subject to appeal process. If that appeal internally is exhausted, he can go to the Employment Relations Tribunal. If he's not happy with the Employment Relations Tribunal, he can even go to the High Court to actually appeal it. So all those avenues of appeal are there. And the contract, in fact, in from one perspective, consolidates your position of employment. It clearly sets out your obligations also, but also the obligations of the employer. And the other point, of course, is that whenever there's any decisions made, it has to be made on the basis of natural justice, which is something that I wanted to highlight to you. Natural justice essentially means, so for example, if there is an allegation made, say, against me, then natural justice means that I must receive that allegation, for example, in writing. I must be given enough time to respond to that allegation. There must be a proper hearing regarding the allegation. And then, even if a decision is made about me, then there must be reasons given as to how they arrived at the decision and what was the outcome of that particular decision. So that's what natural justice means. The other point about discipline also is that there are many instances in Fiji we found within the civil service, because going back into history, sometimes civil servants may not do the right thing, or may do something that they're not supposed to do, not because they deliberately did it, but because perhaps they did not receive enough training. The classic example that we do have is a lot of teachers now at the moment, for example, end up being student counselors, because we don't have enough student counselors in Fiji. Very few people in Fiji who are trained counselors. So a lot of the schools, the teachers become counselors. So if, for example, there may be a complaint against the teacher regarding some decision he or she made when they were a student counselor, the finding may be, yes, the teacher did not do the right thing, but the reason why the teacher did not do the right thing was because they did not have enough training. They did not have enough knowledge about that particular area. So the discipline process for that would be that, yes, he or she did the wrong thing, we need to send him or her for training for 3 months in that specific area. That's what you call positive discipline. You may have done something that because you do not know the procedure, but you are forced in a situation where you had to make a decision. So you should not be actually penalized in a negative manner if, for example, you're forced into that situation. That's what you call positive discipline, to ensure that does not happen again. Of course, like I said, that needs to be principles of natural justice. There may be a need to improve the supervision and management. Sometimes we find a lot of the civil servants or your superiors don't have the ability to communicate well. They don't give specific directions. They don't give specific directives in a very clear, coherent manner. So we need to ensure that all of these things are actually improved to be able to ensure that you are able to deliver the right outcome, the intended outcome. So a lot of this requires a lot of training. A lot of this requires a lot of exposure to different scenarios, which we intend to do through the Ministry of Civil Service. And we, of course, would look forward to your suggestions as to how we can improve communications and training too. We have now, for example, this salary review or job evaluation exercise we've done, we are trying to get your base right. Okay, the idea is to get your base right. So some of the positions, the base actually compared to the private sector, we were paying a lot more. Even those people have got a pay rise. For example, a lot of the drivers in the civil service, they are paid a lot more than what people get paid as drivers in the private sector. But even they have received a pay rise. So we are trying to get everybody's base right. Going forward now is that you'll then be assessed individually. That's what you call a performance-based system. It's over there, it's called performance assessment. So individually you'll be assessed. So your ability to be able to get further pay rises is actually enhanced. And I'll give you an example. You know, under the old system, generally when you got a particular position, they normally put you at the lower end of the salary scale. Very little opportunity for you to move up. Very little opportunity. Because there is no system to do the assessment. No transparent system to do the assessment. So generally what we found is a lot of people get to a position, then after a while when they want a pay rise, they look for positions everywhere else. Because in Fiji we like to chase titles in the civil service. We like to chase titles. The reason why we like titles is because that means a pay rise. Right? So we found, for example, people may have spent, say, 10 years in, say, Ministry of Industry and Trade, getting to know about international trade law. That may be an area of passion for theirs. And we've sent them for training, they've been to a lot of seminars and what have you, overseas and meetings. But because now they've been in the system for such a long time and they have not the opportunity to get a pay rise, they'll look for example, if they're on a senior position, then they'll look for a position as a principal position. Right? So maybe there's a principal position in Ministry of Mangroves. They may know nothing about it, but they'll apply for that. And they may even get it. Because the old system was, well, he's been there for 10 years, let's give it to him or her. He gets there, but all that 10 years of experience and knowledge in industry and trade we've lost. And he simply goes there, he's got no passion for that job. He's not interested in mangroves. He's interested in maybe world trade. But he goes there, all that knowledge we've lost, then we have to spend time and money training him or her. So what we are saying that what this system does, you can stay within that area of passion of yours, but have, because of regular performance assessment, have the ability to move within your band. If you look at the band, the information they've given you, you have the ability to move within the band. And the other point about the performance assessment now is, after the base is now fixed up, assuming all of these ladies are doing the same thing, but these, and gentlemen, sorry, so assuming that all of these 4 ladies are working really well, working very hard. These 2 spend half the time in the grog bowl. This lady may come to work, say, at 9 o'clock in the morning, start combing hair at 4 o'clock to go home at 4:30. Some civil servants who do that. If we gave them all the same pay rise, these 3 ladies who are the high performers, they say, why should we work so hard? These 3 who are the non-performers still get a pay rise, and we get it too. What's the point? Under the new system, they'll be individually assessed. These 3 will have a more of an opportunity to go within the band and go higher than these 3 people. The lesson for these 3 would be, we need to fix up our game. The lesson for these 3 would be, let's keep on working harder, because we'll get rewarded for it. That's what the new system does. So that's the other reason as to why we need to have this performance assessment. We'll be rolling out the guidelines by the end of 2017. We've got the World Bank helping us to roll that out. You'll know beforehand as to how you'll be assessed. Of course, different ministries, different professions will have different methodologies of assessment as to how you'll be assessed individually or even as a group. And of course, again, once you are assessed, you have a right of appeal too. You may feel, well, okay, look, I have not been assessed properly, you can appeal it. In, for example, the Solicitor General's office, they've started implementing this. The lawyers actually get assessed not just by the superiors, but also people who work for them, the subordinates. It's a two-way assessment. How do you, as a supervisor, perform, and how do you, as a subordinate, perform? It's a two-way assessment that's carried out. Next, please. Okay, this I wanted to show to you. As you know that everybody in Fiji has got a tax cut. As you know, we've increased the income tax threshold. So prior to the budget announcement, anybody that earned less than $16,000 did not pay tax. Now, anybody that earns up to $30,000 does not pay any tax. Okay? But those people who earn over $30,000, they have also got a tax cut. Because the way the tax system works is because we've increased the income tax threshold, the next person who pays tax will pay a lower percentage of tax. And I wanted to show this to you. I'll give you an example. So, for example, if you say I'll give you two examples. Say a registered nurse, that band B and F. Band F. So, before the review, you're earning $17,000. And because you're earning more than $16,000, you paid $107 in tax. The total take-home pay was $17,431. a year. Now with the review, your salary has jumped from $17,000 to $20,100, $163. If the tax threshold remained at $16,000, you paid tax of $291. Total take-home pay was $19,000. In other words, if you compare that with that, you've got a $2,400 extra money in your pocket. So it's not just the job evaluation here, but also just the job evaluation gives $2,400. Now, because you no longer pay tax, because the tax threshold has gone up to $30,000, you jump from to $20,000, $20,000, you no longer pay any tax, so your take-home pay, instead of $2,400 extra, you're taking $2,700 extra because of the tax cut. If you did not have the income tax threshold increased to $30,000, you would have taken additional $2,400. But because of the threshold increasing to $30,000, you take $2,700 more. Now let's go on to somebody that earns more than $30,000. So for example, if you're a senior surveyor, Lands Department, a senior surveyor in Lands Department currently, prior to the reforms, got $31,000. They paid tax of $2,000, and the take-home pay was $29,000. Now their salary has jumped up from $31,000 to $43,000. That's how much of a pay rise surveyors have got, because they're a specialized area. So with the income tax threshold of $16,000, they pay $4,000 tax. They have a take-home pay of $39,000. In other words, they have a pay rise of $9,800 after tax. Now, because of the tax threshold being increased to $30,000, they have also got a tax cut. So they now, just go this way, buddy, go scroll across. So now they got 43,000, but instead of paying $4,200 tax, they now pay $2,300 tax because of the tax cut. Therefore, they take an additional $11,000 after taxes home. So you can see what the tax cuts have actually done. In some cases, people receive huge windfalls. The last one there, so director nursing. A director nursing, so 44,000 now gets paid 67,000. If you move across, they actually have an additional $20,000 take-home pay. So that's the level of increment some of these people have received. Okay? The next. Okay, I'll now pass you over to Jane Curran. Jane Curran is the director of the Civil Service Reform Management Unit. Jane Curran first came to Fiji when we were setting up the elections office prior to 2014. We used her to set up the HR section in the elections office. As you know, those of you who know the government system, before, in the olden days when they had elections, the elections office only recruited staff just before the elections. So they'll get people from the different government ministries, build up the elections office, hold the elections, and then after the elections, everybody would go back to their ministries. That no longer, of course, is the case. Because to have an internationally accredited elections office, you always need to have permanent staff. So if you're going to have permanent staff, we needed to set up the HR system. So Jane Curran has got a lot of experience, in particular in Queensland, and has worked in numerous places, including Papua New Guinea and wonderful places like Afghanistan and all sorts of weird places, but also including in Australia. She's worked in the education sector for quite some time. And the Australian government actually gave her or sent her to us on aid to set up the elections office HR. So after she did a fantastic job, we asked her to stay back to help us with the human resources side of the reform, and Jane is the one who's been the driving force behind these changes in respect of the implementation of it. So I'll hand you over to Jane now. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to take you through more the technical side of what happened with the job evaluation and how the bands work and how the money got attached to the bands. So first of all, some background. The guideline was approved by the Public Service Commission, came out in January this year. So it's actually on the Public Service Commission website. It's been there since January. The transition procedures, which include the requirement to issue the contracts, have been on that website since March this year. So although this might be new information and it's good to be able to come out and tell you, the information's actually been out in the domain for a long time. It is a fundamental change. It's about position-based pay. We separate the person from the position. When we evaluate the job, we're looking at the job, not the person who's sitting in the job. So we evaluate what's required for the job. The bands are therefore determined by the requirements of the job. So differences about different people who sit in the jobs don't come into job evaluation. I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. So the qualification requirements for the job are only one of the factors that we consider, and part of what I'll explain this morning is what all of those factors are. So there's actually 10 factors, and I'll go through them and explain what they mean. There are a couple of assumptions that we make when we evaluate the jobs. Because we're evaluating the job and not the person, we assume that the person who will then occupy the job will be competent. So we don't evaluate a job based on what might go wrong. We evaluate a job based on the assumption that it will go right, that the people doing the work are competent. We also we assume that the size of the job in terms of the volume of the work, that has been taken care of. So volume is not part of job evaluation. We don't evaluate a job based on this person's got more work to do than this person, because we assume as part of job evaluation that the jobs have been designed correctly and that the work has been fairly distributed. If it's not, that can't be fixed through job evaluation. That has to be fixed through other means. So just to recap a little bit, the Minister talked about all of the other guidelines that have come out. So this is human resource management. It's something that's my technical field, but probably not anyone else in this room. So you understand how the different guidelines impact on you as an employee. So job evaluation is about the position. So it's about deciding what level the position is. Okay, is it a band A at the bottom or a band L at the top or somewhere in between? That's job evaluation. Open merit is how we advertise and then run the assessment process to decide who the best person for the job is. So who gets to sit in the job once the job's been designed and evaluated. That's open merit. Discipline is about making sure that everyone understands what's required of them, and that if people aren't performing to the required standard or not behaving the way we want them to, that we take action to bring everyone back onto the way we want it to be working. And performance management is how we assess you as a person. So job evaluation is about the position. Performance management is about you and how you perform the job. And what we want to be able to do through performance management is make sure that we recognise the different levels of performance that people have. So it's not about having a qualification on its own, it's about what you do with that qualification once you're in the job, because you should perform better if you have a higher qualification. But we all know people that doesn't apply to. We've all seen people who have a higher qualification but don't necessarily do a better job than someone who has the qualification that's the minimum requirement for the job. So as with all of the guidelines, this is all a big change for everybody. So there have been some issues in terms of the results in the job evaluation. The results are a reflection of the information that went in. Okay? The job evaluation questionnaires that were filled out by everybody, that's what we used to evaluate the jobs. And when I say we, I'm talking about the 200 trained and accredited evaluators from across the civil service who formed the committees who evaluated the jobs. But they were reliant on the information that was supplied by you in those job evaluation questionnaires. Some people took that exercise more seriously than others. Some of the information that was supplied didn't really justify the job. We had to go looking for more information to say, well, this person really, when we read the duties, all they do is plan and budget. They don't actually do anything else. But of course they do. There must be other things that they do. All of the tranches are now complete. So the job evaluation was planned across 3 tranches. This has been talked about a fair bit. So tranche 1 came out in July. That was the admin cadres. Tranche 2 in August. That was health and education mainly. And tranche 3 was completed last week, and the results have been sent to the ministries. So tranche 3 was the technical jobs and the lawyers and the medical officers. So they were tranche 3. So the results are now with the permanent secretaries, and we've asked payroll to generate the reports so that we can start to issue the contracts. So the way the contracting works is that payroll generates a report, and that report is used by the ministry to put together the contracts. So the information on your contract is directly linked to the payroll. So if anyone is missing, so anyone who hasn't received a contract, we need to go back to payroll to find out why. Okay? Because anyone who's on the payroll should be on those lists. And that's the ministry, that's the partnership with the ministry, because we obviously can't do that in the reform unit. We don't know, okay? We don't know, we don't have that level of detail. We can only go by what's in the report that comes from payroll. When the contracts come out, because payroll is generated on your substantive position, the contract relates to your substantive position, okay? So the position that you own, not the position that you might be acting on. So acting letters have to be generated separately. Okay? The transitional step for nurses particularly, so the transitional steps in those middle bands are there for teachers and nurses and a couple of the technical groups, because step 1 was well above the threshold of the 15%. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Okay? And it's there so that you don't have to advertise, we don't have to advertise all of those jobs, and you don't have to apply for your job. But it's only intended to be there for a short period of time. As soon as we get performance assessment in, you'll be able to move on to the other steps. So that's why there's a difference between, say, there's some confusion around the transitional step, but that's the reason why, okay? There's the alternative was to put you onto a lower band and have to make you act and advertise the position, and you all have to apply, but we, in discussion with the ministry, thought that it was better to have that transitional step. Okay. Some other issues. Inaccurate information. There seems to be a lot of rumours out there. There have been no salary decreases. We check the payroll reports before we send them out to the ministries, and the payroll report actually shows your substantive salary, the new salary that's been applied. It's done electronically through a formula, and it shows the percentage of increase. And we check those reports before we send them to the ministries to make sure that everyone's increase is in the positive and that it's above a certain level. So all of the reports that we have show that everyone's getting an increase. If that's not the case, if that's not what comes from the ministry, you need to immediately go back to your HR department and check it, because it isn't right. And they will come back to us and we'll do that checking process. If you think that your job is not on the right band, after I've gone through the factors and explained how the evaluations were done, if you think that your job has not gone to the right band, there is a process. The process is that you can request a review. So through your permanent secretary, you put up a submission and you say, I don't think we fully reflected all of the requirements of the job in the documentation that we put in. Please, can you review this group of positions? And that's what the process is there for, because like I said, we can only go by the documentation that came in. So if it wasn't accurate, if you think that there needs to be a review, then that's what the process is there for. Start dates. So there's no deadline on reviews, but of course the longer it takes for you to submit, the longer it takes for us to be able to review it and to reissue contracts, and the start date for contracts is dependent on when you sign. The start date is the first pay in the month that you sign the contract. So if you sign the contract in September, the effective date for pay is the 10th of September. That's the first pay fortnight that starts in September. If you sign in October, it's the first pay fortnight that starts in October, and that's the 8th of October. So the payroll calendar is published, I think people generally know when the pay fortnights are, and so it's linked to the actual pay calendar. Okay. The only exception to that, just mentioned that the only exception to that is if your job was in tranche 2 and something went wrong and the contract didn't get issued, so it's not you sitting on the contract deciding not to sign it, but the ministry hasn't actually issued the contract, then we can backdate to August. Okay? So if there's something gone wrong with the system and it was supposed to be August and it's not your fault, then we can backdate to August so that you're not disadvantaged. I mentioned that jobs where the increase is more than 15% have to be advertised. The original transition procedures that came out in March said 10%. The budget announcement increased that to 15%. So if there's an increase that's more than 15%, the jobs have to be advertised. And what happens is you get a contract at a lower band, that's your safety net. That's the band that you would go back to if you don't win the position when those jobs are advertised. So this is, for example, the specialist nurses is a good example. The increase is well over 15%. So you would get a contract on band F. The specialist nursing positions will be advertised, and once the merit process is complete, you'll get a new contract at band G. I've been emailing the ministry since yesterday to say what's happening with the acting, because we thought that there would be acting appointments for the specialist nurses, so we're asking them what's happened with the acting appointments. Okay. Another example would be the one that was on the tax slide. So director nursing in the hospitals, that increase is 70-something%. The band L positions, the director nursing in the hospitals. So the people sitting in those jobs would be offered a contract at a much lower level that is within the 15%, but they'll get an acting letter so that they continue to act until the merit process is completed. The ministries where there are large volumes of those positions, particularly health and education, are supposed to be preparing a recruitment plan so that that can be published, because not all the jobs will be advertised all at once. Usually you start at the top and then work out the movements in case people don't win the jobs that they were previously in, and then advertise what's left. So they're supposed to have those recruitment plans ready and advertised by early October so that you can plan ahead and know how long you're going to be acting if you're in one of those positions. You can identify those positions on the snapshot because they'll have a high percentage in the columns on the left-hand side, and then they'll have an entry on the right-hand side that shows a lower band and a percentage within the 15%, and that's what the contract would actually be at. So having said all that, how did we actually arrive at the bands that the positions went on to? So we tendered for a job evaluation methodology. Job evaluation is a HR technical field. There are commercial methodologies out there. We put out a tender. A company called SP10, who's based in New Zealand, won the tender, and the methodology is called SP10 because there are 10 factors that go into the job evaluation. Now, they partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Fiji, and they're used by a lot of organisations in Fiji. So we trained 200 evaluators. I'm not sure if there are any here. I don't recognise anyone from the training, but we trained 200 people from across all ministries and all disciplines so that they could participate in the evaluations. I'm going to briefly go through the factors. If you want to know more, we're going to train more evaluators at the end of this year to increase the pool of people who are able to conduct these evaluations. So if you're interested in more information, you can nominate to do that training. So the first factor is education, and they have different weightings. So some factors have a higher weighting than others, and education actually has a very high weighting. But it's the education that's required for the job, not the education that's held by the person who is sitting in the job, because we're evaluating the position and not the person. So when we evaluate the job, if the job requirement, say like for a primary teacher is a diploma, then it's a diploma. If it's a nurse, it's a degree. Okay? If it's an engineer, then it's a degree and registration. So it's the qualification that's required for the job. And because we're evaluating the job, if the person holds a qualification that is higher than that's required for the job, that has no effect on the job evaluation because we're evaluating the job. The higher qualification would be considered in the performance assessment. And it's not just about the qualification. So it's not the fact that you hold a higher qualification. It's how that impacts on your performance. We encourage people to do higher qualifications because it should help you to do your job better and obviously open up career opportunities as well. Okay. The experience, so we do consider experience. I've seen newspaper reports, headlines, we don't care about experience. We do care about experience, but in a context. We don't care about seniority. It's a different thing. Experience when you do job evaluation is about the experience that you require to be competent at the job. How long does it take to learn the job? How many years would it take for someone in training and on the job to be fully competent, able to be left alone to undertake those tasks? Some jobs, it's 6 months. Some jobs, it's 10 years, 15 years, even longer. It depends on the job, okay? And obviously there are different scores for those different requirements in experience. Complexity is how predictable is the job? When you come to work in the morning, do you know exactly what you're going to do? Is it processing forms? Is it absolutely structured? Or is it a new and exciting adventure every time you walk through the door because you don't know what's coming? Okay? And obviously there are different scores for that different level of predictability. Okay? The more predictable, the lower the score. The less predictable, the more experience you need to be able to cope. This is how the factors link together. Scope is about how much control you have over your work. Does someone tell you what to do? Or do you just get told what the end result is supposed to be and you work out the rest? Okay. Problem solving, how much judgment is required? How available are rules and guidelines? And this is where we start to think about, it is where risk comes in, but because we're assuming that everyone's competent, we look at it in terms of problem solving. How difficult are the problems and how many people are available to help me solve those problems? If I have an immediate supervisor on hand, that if I don't know how to do something, I can go to them, then your level of problem solving is actually lower than someone who's the person that it all gets escalated to up the tree. Freedom to act is directly linked to problem solving. So where problem solving is about what type of problems you have to solve and who can help you, freedom to act is about, it's the bit about how close is the supervision. Okay. So when you filled out your job evaluation questionnaires and you had to say, what problems do I solve? And then it said, who do you go to for help and what type of problems do you escalate? That's where freedom to act comes in. So am I expected to solve my problems myself or can I give them to someone else and they'll solve them for me? Impact of decisions, again, we assume competence. So this is not about saying, what is the impact if this goes wrong? This is about the impact on the organisation of the job that you do. Does your work have a relationship to the reputation of the ministry? Can you make money for the ministry? Can you move resources around in the ministry? Interpersonal skills is about the nature of contact that you have with other people. So it's about what people you talk to, are they inside the organisation or outside, and what is the nature of the contact. Do you serve them? Do you have to negotiate with them? Do you have to explain things to them? So those different levels of communication and who it's with. So some of us interact with the public all the time, but it might just be giving them information rather than persuading them to think a different way or even negotiating different arrangements for them. So that's interpersonal skills. Authorities is about whether you get to spend money and whether you have any control over staff. Now, in the public sector, most people don't have a budget authority. It's mainly with the permanent secretary, but there is an intermediate sort of step where you might be in charge of a budget and you recommend expenditure that is then authorised by someone else. So those different levels get taken into account in authorities. And the last one is how many staff you supervise. And it's not just direct supervision. So Permanent Secretary for Education, for example, gets to count everyone in the ministry because eventually he's responsible, even though he's not directly supervising. So it's not just about your direct supervision, it's also who those people supervise and who they supervise as well. So it's the total. So when we evaluate someone like the job for, say, PS Education, this one actually doesn't even appear in the book because it's 12,000 people. So all of those factors come together to a score. And there's a very complicated spreadsheet that we don't have to do the maths on, thank goodness. It's all formularised and it comes together with a score. And the score determines the band. Okay, so you've got a copy of the salary bands. I didn't try and put them on a slide, there's too much information. So A to O. But the dollars for the bands were done independently. The evaluators didn't know how much each band was going to be worth when they were evaluating the jobs. So think of it as two sides of a coin. One side is the evaluation of the job, the other side is the money that goes with the band. So in developing the bands, A is at the bottom and O is at the top. So effective basically now, because tranche 3 is out, all of the other occupational scales are being abolished. So there's no more NU, AC, LB, there was 31 of them and then I think 29 in education alone. So they will all go, okay? You'll still have your title and for quite a long time we'll probably put in brackets the old scale so that people know what the relationship was. But eventually we'll learn the new language of the bands. All of the positions fit onto the bands, including the GWEs. The salary bands are benchmarked to the private sector. This has been explained and discussed quite a few times, ministerial statements and other statements that we've been working on the benchmarking for over a year now. So when we say we're benchmarked to the private sector, it's the midpoint in those salary bands. So step 4 is the one that's actually benchmarked to the private sector, and the other steps are built around step 4. Step 4, to arrive at that, we had a number of reports. We had the World Bank do a compensation benchmark survey. So they did a sample of jobs from the public sector, and then they went to the private sector and said, do you have jobs similar to this? Tell us how much you pay. And then we did an additional report for teachers and nurses because there's not much of a private sector for teachers and nurses in Fiji. And we asked the World Bank to survey neighbouring countries, not to find out how much teachers and nurses get paid in those countries, but to give us comparative jobs, comparative occupations. So we were saying in Australia, New Zealand, Samoa, Tonga, I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head the other countries, but they did a survey around the region and said, well, nurses in these countries get a similar pay to these occupations. Teachers in these countries get similar pay to these occupations. And we use that to moderate and check through the job evaluation to say, yep, they're lining up. Okay? So the results were, so nurses in other countries are on similar occupations to statisticians and accountants. Okay? Degree qualified occupations. So they were those two reports. Then when we partnered with SP10 and PwC, we also have the Fiji salary survey, the PwC salary survey that's done every year. And it also tells us, so because they use the same methodology, so they can say, well, a position with this range of points, which we call this band, has an average of this particular range. So that's how those midpoints were developed. And then steps 1 to 3 are percentages of the midpoint, and so are steps 5 to 7. The first thing we discovered, and the Minister mentioned this as well, is at the bottom of the band, so band A, we already paid more than the private sector. So we were aiming to benchmark to a percentage of the private sector, and it wasn't 100%, it was 75%. But at the bottom, we're already well above that. So, and we're not looking to take anyone's pay backwards. So there's a sliding scale. At the bottom bands, band A and B are about 110% of the private sector. At the top, bands M, N and O are between 60 and 70% of the private sector, and the bands in the middle are 100% of the private sector. And that's what the Minister was talking about before when he said that, you know, at the entry levels, we pay well, but at the upper levels, we pay less than the private sector. So although we still pay less than the private sector, that's why there's such big increases at the top, and there's a bit of a sliding scale. And some of the professions, there are bigger increases because the benchmarking shows that they're the areas that we needed to catch up more with the private sector. The bands are published. They've been on the Ministry of Economy website since the budget. So you've got a hard copy, but if you ever need other copies for whatever reason, they're on the Ministry of Economy website. So movement on to the bands. The steps in transition. How did we decide which step you went to? You went to the step that gave a maximum of up to 15%. So that's what I was saying before about nurses going on to the transitional step, because step 1 is well above 15%. But the intent is to get you there as quickly as we can. New appointments get made to the steps on the band that equates to their assessment through the recruitment process. So when someone is recruited, we go through the open merit. It's not intended, the bands aren't designed for everyone to necessarily start on step 1. So if you score really highly in the assessment process, you get above 80% in the assessment process, you'll go to step 3. And then after probation, when it's confirmed that you fully are operating to the full range of duties of the job, the expectation would be that you would go to step 4. So it's not expected, the bands are not designed for people to always start on step 1, as you'll see that the bands overlap. They're not discrete like the old scales were. The midpoint, step 4, is what we call the competence step. So you can see step 4 is where we benchmark to the private sector. It's also where we expect most people to sit after performance assessment comes in. Because if someone is doing the full range of their duties to the standard required, that's the step that we're aiming for people to be moving to, the step 4. Steps 1 to 3 are for people who are developing into the role, people who need training, people who are not fully performing the range of duties required for the job. Steps 5 to 7 are for people who go the extra mile, people who are doing something extra, people whose performance assessment shows that they're the high flyers. The performance management guideline will explain what the criteria will be for assessment. It's not written yet. There's some final consultations to happen next month. Then we can finalise the guideline and have it out by the end of the year. So we mentioned that jobs where the increase is more than 15% have to be advertised. This is so that we make sure that we know that we've got the right people in those jobs. Some of the increases have been up to 70, 75%. And in the technical areas that are coming out now, some of them are up in that range as well. So it's reasonable that we go through a merit selection to make sure that we've got the right person in those jobs. But everyone who's currently working gets a contract at a lower band, and that's your safety net. So you know that you have a job. There's a commitment that everyone has a job, no job losses through job evaluation. So that's why you have that lower level contract and the acting until the open merit is finished. The snapshot, like I mentioned, identifies those positions. So when you look at the snapshot, it's the document that's got the 3 pages. The columns on the left-hand side show the actual increases for the position. If it's over 15%, there'll be an entry in the columns on the right-hand side, and that's the That's the lower level contract, but they would be acting until the open merit is complete. Health and education, we're supposed to issue the contract and the acting letter at the same time so that you would understand what was happening. Other ministries have to do an expression of interest. So that's all for job evaluation. There are other reforms that are happening in the ministries. So we've talked about the guidelines. There's a lot of other activity that's also happening in ministries, and you need to be having some two-way conversations with your ministry management to see what's happening in your own ministry. But everyone's working on business process improvements, so mapping processes, identifying problems, and trying to improve service delivery. And this applies as much in the administrative areas as it does in the technical areas. So we know that there are issues with a lot of the HR, but work is being done to try and address some of those issues. The World Bank has done institutional reviews of most ministries. Most ministries actually have their reports already. The ones that don't are education and industry and trade. Everyone else is finished. And the ministries are working on those, on the implementation of those. Just as an example, so in education, their reports aren't done yet, but they're focusing on a review of the headquarters and the districts and the divisions to better align for service delivery, and also a staffing ratio study, so class sizes, how many kids to a teacher, how many teachers to a head teacher, those sorts of questions. In health, so Health's World Bank review was done nearly a year ago, and the report came through mid last year, I think. And the PS is actually working on headquarters and the management structures. Okay, so he's got a team together that's working on that. They're also looking at a separate review of the role between the medical superintendent and the hospital administrator to better align those functions, and the HR management information system. So health is actually the pilot for the government for the health for the HR management information system, and that should help with some of these processes that we're having some issues with. If you want more information, so we regularly run these sessions, not always with the Minister because he's a bit busy, but we have a team of information officers who are also available to come out and give updates on what's happening in the reforms and progress. So particularly like when the performance management is ready, we'll gear them up to come out and do some more sessions. And some of you might have been to sessions that they've run in the past. They came out to the West not too long ago. You can request a session, so if you've got colleagues who weren't able to come today, you can request a session through your PS back to us on that email address, and we can fit in around the various timetables or requirements that you might have. Like at the moment they're doing sessions for schools which all start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so they're rostered to start work later in the day so that they can do those sessions. So we'll fit in around the working arrangements for your ministry or department. There's other training that's available. So the Ministry of Civil Service, who is quite separate to us, the reform unit doesn't work within the Ministry of Civil Service. We're in the Ministry of Economy. But the Ministry of Civil Service has a core skills training unit, and we partner with them for some of the training. So they're particularly running CV writing and interview skills. So with so many jobs coming up being advertised, when you have a look at the snapshot, you'll see that there's all these senior jobs that have to be advertised. If you're interested in applying, you need to get yourself prepared. Okay? So the training program is on the Ministry of Civil Service website. If you can't find it, email us and we'll put you in touch with the relevant people. Then there's training that's run through the unit itself, so like the discipline training, which is very much focused on supervision and management, which will also be great if you're applying for promotions in the future. So that training you can apply directly back through us for the discipline or the investigation officer training.
Okay, thank you, Jane. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the quick rundown on regarding the reforms and the various issues emanating from that. Before I open up the floor for questions, and if you have any clarifications you seek, when we started this reform, I remember last year, we had a group of unionists who came to us and said to us, why don't you give a pay rise across the board of 15% to everybody? And we had said no to them. Because what we said to them was a couple of things. One of the reasons was that by only agreeing to a 15% pay rise, when I actually said no, they said, okay, why don't we negotiate? We probably could have been happy with a 10% pay rise. But the reason why we said no to them was this. We said to them, you may be actually shortchanging your members. As you know, some people have got a 70% pay rise. Some people have got a 30-40% pay rise. Some people, of course, have got a 15%. Some people have got a 10% pay rise. But I said, by doing it across the board, you're actually shortchanging your members. Secondly, you are not also able to differentiate between the different skill sets required within a particular cadre. The example that I gave are the nurses. By doing a 15% pay rise across the board, you will not have differentiated between the nurses who actually have, perform higher risk areas as opposed to those who don't. The third thing, of course, was that there was no point of differentiation. The example that I gave earlier on was that those who were high flyers would have been disincentivized from doing well or being the high flyers because the people who weren't the high flyers and were spending half the time in the grog bowl or not coming to work on time would have also got a pay rise. What we have done in this exercise, everybody's got a pay rise because we want to fix up the base. Once we fix up the base, then we have regular assessments based on individual performance. So that gives you a big opportunity. Of course, in a few years' time, there may be a need to relook at the base again. Some countries, for example, do it every 10 years. So a reassessment of the base is different to your continuous assessment. So that's part and parcel of what has been happening. As you know also that we have recently increased the meal allowance from $9 to $20. Some people have said to us, well, why have you put it up so much? Maybe $20 in Tavua town is a lot of money for a meal. But $20 in Suva or Denrao is not a lot of money. So you never know where you'll end up having to buy a meal. So what we've done is we've actually decided to err on the side of making it slightly higher than for it to be less. Because the moment you have things less, then people try and, rig the system. We've seen that happen. We see people rig the system. We don't want people to rig the system. In a way, sometimes people should only be claiming for one, they try and claim for two. Or some people work in cahoots. I had at the AG's office where there was one staff, actually he's actually in prison now, where they were, for example, when he was actually a driver, when they're filling out the timesheets together with the accounts people, they would add an additional 1 in front of the 20. These are the things that used to happen. And sometimes people do it because perhaps the system does not take into account the ground realities. Similarly, we want to obviously be able to pay higher allowances for people who go to, say, maritime areas or deep rural areas in terms of the accommodation allowances. So there's a lot of other ways of looking at making your jobs a lot more conducive to the way in which you're rewarded also. So these are some of the things that we've done. So let's, just before we also open up the questions, yesterday when we were in Suva, I think about, it would be safe to say, 3/4 of the, how many people did we have, about 300? We had about 300 people yesterday afternoon. Probably 3/4 of them were nurses there. But many of the issues that came out, I don't know how many of you actually read the Fiji Sun today, many of the issues that did come out were the day-to-day practical issues. Not necessarily to do with the reform, but some of the unfortunate administrative decisions that people within the ministry have made, which is separate to the reform. I mean, we were informed yesterday that somebody decided, how the nurses get dropped off at home. Recently, we did not know about this until yesterday, that somebody decided that they were not going to drop them off at home. They drop them off at one central place, and then they have to find the accommodation from there. That obviously is not acceptable as far as we are concerned from government perspective. We also discovered that some people have not been paid overtime in the past. And again, it's government policy that you should be paid overtime. If you're working overtime, you need to be paid overtime. So there's some deviations that are taking place in some of the ministries. which is a separate issue to the reforms. But we want you to tell us about that. So when we actually have if we can restrict the questions to the reforms, we don't know anything about the reforms. When we then have a short presentation on the budget, those of you who have individual issues, Jane and Bernadette will be at the back of the room, and you can go and raise those individual issues with them, so we can then address them. Because we find this actually quite useful. Because sometimes we do not know what people in the hierarchy, in the administration of a particular ministry is doing. So there are those kind of issues that we want to resolve, and be able to take that feedback from you, to be able to ensure that everybody in all the ministries actually are on the same page. For us, our philosophy is this. We want to be a good choice employer. We want people to want to come and work for government. We want people to want to stay within government and to be satisfied with their work environment. Not everything is just about the base salary, it's about the conditions of your office, the equipment that you have. Those of you who have got government quarters, what's the condition of the quarters? Whether the allowances you're being paid when you have to go and rent premises, are they the right amount of money or not? Whether you get enough training or not. When you do apply for training, is it the same people always getting the training, or is it everybody being given an equal opportunity? Those are the kind of things that we're also looking at. Because believe you me, when I do the presentation on the budget, you'll see economically we're actually doing quite well. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to do well. And of course, a lot of opportunity for civil servants to be in the very near future, be rewarded, on a much bigger basis too, a much better basis too. So I'll open up the floor. There's somebody going around with a mic, I understand. And just please put your hand up and feel free to ask any questions.